Okay, so welcome everyone. Today we're going to be looking at the story of Abraham and Isaac and that almost sacrifice. So this should be an interesting study. It was a bit challenging to get it prepared, but with all your helpful comments, I think we'll be able to sort this out. So the first question is, does God command to kill? Hmm. So in these studies that we've been doing over months, we're finding cases where the Bible reads like God himself has killed. But we've seen a number of cases where, we've sorted that out with careful investigation of word meanings is largely how we've done it. But we haven't looked at them all. But we've looked at enough to trust that once we haven't carefully examined yet, work the same way, that God does not personally kill. But what about cases where God asks someone else to kill? And the most obvious example of that is about Abraham and Isaac. So God says in his 10 commandments, actually, thou shalt not kill. And then he commands someone to kill. If he did that, it would certainly be a contradiction, wouldn't it? It just wouldn't make sense. So this is going to take some explanation and again, some careful word studies. And would God ask anyone to commit sin, even to kill their own child? That is an abomination according to the word. So let's read Jeremiah 7:31, Axel.
And they have built the high places of Tophet, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I commanded them not, neither came it into my heart.
Okay. So he says he never commanded it. He never even thought such a thing, not favorably towards it. So here's an interesting verse, Romans 4:3.
For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed Elohim, and it was reckoned to him for righteousness.
Okay, so that tells us something about Abraham, and we'll see how that works out in this study here. So can God ask anyone to kill? It doesn't seem so when you consider the sixth commandment.
Thou shalt not kill.
Okay, that's pretty plain. So if God commanded Abraham to kill Isaac, does that mean God contradicted his own character? It would seem so. God declares in Malachi 3:6.
Malachi 3:6, for I am the Lord, I change not, therefore ye sons of Jacob are not consumed.
Okay, so if his character does not change, then neither does his law. That would make sense. One of the first principles for correct biblical understanding is that there are no contradictions in the Bible. It only seems so. We just think there is because it looks like it on the surface. So I've just got here the thumbnail for a video I put out this week, mistakes people make reading the Bible, just about a 4-minute video, but that's a result of our previous study where we went through quite a number of examples of mistakes people make. And I'm intending to make a series of short videos about that. So this is just the first one. So God never asked Abraham to violate his law, Mark 3:4.
And he said to them, is it right to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil, to save life or to kill? But they remained silent.
Okay, can you see the connection there? To do evil is basically equated with to kill. In other words, to do evil. That's something important to consider in this study today here.
To do good is to save life.
Right, the opposite. Okay. So does God tempt or test? James 1:13 and 14.
Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed.
Okay. So here's the verse right after that, tempt Abraham. Okay, that's what I was looking for. So let's read that, Genesis 22:1 and 2.
And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham. And he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of.
Okay, so it actually says God did tempt Abraham.
My version says tested.
Okay, we're gonna look at that.
We're gonna go there.
We're gonna go there, yep. So it sounds like God just said, offer your son Isaac for a burnt offering. And Abraham said, okay, and proceeded to do it. And we could say, what? Would God ask that? Would Abraham do that? You know, very legitimate questions. That's kind of a surprising thing there, isn't it? When you have a concept of God's character. Sounds kind of like a contradiction. You know, did God tempt Abraham to do evil? On the surface reading, and from what we've looked at up here, to kill is to do evil, it sounds like it. So could he have been asking Abraham to kill? That's a big question. If he wasn't tempting Abraham, what is the alternative, Judy?
Test him.
Test him, yeah. That's what your New King James Version said. Tempt and test are kind of similar. They are different in meaning, though. Here's the meaning for tempt. It's the word nasah. This is the Hebrew word behind tempt as used here in Genesis 22:1, but it actually means to test, try, prove. The very last word they have in this definition is tempt. Okay.
I have it there too.
Oh, okay, it's up there too. The idea is that it's maybe doesn't mean tempt as in entice to do evil. Okay. There's some good examples of that, and the kind of real obvious one is from Daniel chapter 1. Martha?
Prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink.
He certainly wasn't saying tempt us, was he? It
No.
was trial to see the results of the diet they preferred. Okay, and then Deuteronomy 13:3.
You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul.
Okay, testing, King James says proveth. Okay, 2 Chronicles 32:31.
Howbeit, in the business of the ambassadors of the princes of Babylon, who sent unto him to inquire of the wonder that was done in the land, God left him to try him, that he might know all that was in his heart.
Okay, so there's a different word again, try, but that could be similar to test or prove. God wasn't actually tempting him. And it says that he might know what was in his heart. And really, God knows the heart. Okay, this is really, in a sense, to show King Hezekiah what is in his own heart. Okay, God knows our hearts better than we do. So God did not tempt Abraham, but he surely tested him. And let's read Genesis 22:17 and 18.
That in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed, as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore. And thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice.
Where it says, thou hast obeyed my voice, that's kind of interesting. How did Abraham obey?
By doing what God asked him to do,
Which was what?
to go up to Mount Moriah with his son.
Okay. He eventually did not sacrifice his son, though, as he understood God was asking him. There's a sense in which he obeyed because he obeyed the sixth commandment, which says, do not kill. Well, that's kind of an interesting question.
But yeah,
He obeyed in some ways and tried to obey in some other ways, I guess.
in verse 10, it says, Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. So that, yeah.
Right. In his mind, he was obeying. I mean, he never finally did it, of course.
No, because God intervened.
Yeah. So in the fact that he didn't do it, he obeyed the command to not kill.
It's true.
That's kind of interesting. But a real key to understanding all this is to understand some of these words referring to offerings. So we need to understand, offer him there for a burnt offering. And I made a list of words here, different offering types. So there's just the word offering, which is mincha, and it's a Hebrew word used 211 times, first used in Genesis 4:3. And then all these burnt offering, drink offering, freewill offering, etc., all these different offering types are listed here. But it's interesting that in the Hebrew, there's no separate word meaning offering attached to the names of the various offerings listed. So when you read burnt offering, there's just one word for it. There's no word for burnt and then a separate word for offering. Okay, and that applies in each of these cases. So there's only one word that designates each type of sacrifice. But in English, the word offering is included in the translation of each one, although it's not actually there as a separate word. For example, in Hebrew, burnt offering is a single word, Allah, and the Hebrew word for sin offering is a single word, chataya. Okay, not sure about the pronunciation, but there's no separate word for offering. So the very first time the word chataya is found in the Bible, it is translated as sin. Okay, let's read Genesis 4:7 here.
If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it.
So H2403 is chata, or is translated as sin in Genesis 4:7. Now let's read Exodus 29:14.
But the flesh of the bullock and his skin and his dung shalt thou burn with fire without the camp. It is a sin offering.
Okay, so now in this verse, the same original word, 2403, is translated not as sin, but as sin offering. Okay, but in both verses, it's the same chata. So what happens is the word offering is used in one case, but not the other. And you can see in Genesis 4:7, and if you do us not well, sin offering lies at the door. That doesn't make sense. So offering, that word is added or not according to the context. Okay. And the same thing happens in the New Testament. Let's read 2 Corinthians 5:21.
For he has made him to be sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him.
So made him to be sin. Some would understand that as a sin offering, or it can be understood made him to have sinful flesh, that is, fallen flesh. Of course, he did not sin, but he had the same flesh we do, which after Adam's fall was a sinful flesh, is one way to term it. However, Christ knew no sin, as in he never committed any acts of sin. So again, we've got sin understood in two different ways from the same original word. So offering is added when required by the context in both Old and New Testaments.
That one I don't understand, because isn't he like the Passover lamb, and the Passover lamb had nothing to do with sin.
Passover lamb could be turned a sin offering. I agree in a sense, that's a whole nother subject, in the sense that God never required offerings to pay him off for sin. Okay, kind of a separate subject, but an important one.
Okay.
So in the Hebrew manuscripts of the Old Testament, there is no word offering connected to any sacrifices, even though the biblical Hebrew does have a word for offering, which is korban. The word can be translated as something brought near the altar as a present, and you find korban in the New Testament by itself to describe an offering here in Mark 7:11.
But you say, if a man says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is korban, that is, dedicated to the temple.
Okay, it's a shorter version there, isn't it? King James says that is to say a gift, etc. The point is that we need to correctly understand what is meant by offering as used in Genesis 22:2, which we won't read here, but we've read it already. Offer him therefore a burnt offering. So let's look at this. In Genesis 22:2, we've got offer him, which is Allah. We've mentioned that already. Therefore a burnt offering, which is Olah. And it's easy to mix those up, but two terms there that we want to understand. So Allah means to go up, ascend, rise. It is used hundreds of times in this basic way. Only in certain sacrificial contexts does it take on the meaning of to offer up. Okay, so let's look at some examples here.
And God said unto Jacob, Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there, and make there an altar unto God that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother.
So arise and go up is from Allah. Exodus 19:3.
And Moses went up, Allah, unto God, and the Lord called unto him out of the mountain, saying, Thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel.
Okay, so there's went up, nothing to do with an offering. Genesis 19:28.
Then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land which went up like the smoke of a furnace.
Genesis 2:6.
Genesis 2:6. But there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground.
In that case, it's more like mist or water. It's nothing to do with fire or smoke, but it's something that is going up. Okay, Psalm 24:3.
Who shall ascend, Allah, into the hill of the Lord, or who shall stand in his holy place?
Okay, so from quite a few uses, we can see that the default meaning is to basically go up, ascend, or rise up. The sacrificial meaning only comes at times from the context. And here's Allah showing the definitions of it. In most of the cases we're concerned with, it's in the hifil verb form, so that's what I've included here. So we've got to bring up, cause to ascend or climb, basically to go up some elevation, go up a hill or something like that. Okay, then we have the word Olah. Okay, so we've looked at Allah, 59:27. This is now Olah, 59:30, burnt offering. So the Hebrew word Olah is used 288 times in the King James Version, and in all but two verses it is translated as burnt offering or burnt sacrifice. And here's the two exceptions. First one is 1 Kings 10:5.
The food on his table, the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters, and their apparel, his cupbearers, and his entryway by which he went up to the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her.
And this is
It's talking about the Queen of Sheba,
right.
when she saw all the wisdom of Solomon and the house that he had built and all that stuff.
Yeah, she was very impressed. No more spirit in her, like it took her breath away, I guess, kind of, we might say.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so his ascent when he went up, mine says, and his entryway by which he went up into the house of the Lord.
Okay. So this actually uses both of those words, Olah and Allah.
Mhm.
Okay, now Ezekiel 40:26.
And there were 7 steps to go up to it, and the arches thereof were before them, and it had palm trees, one on this side and another on that side, upon the post thereof.
So that's the word Olah, to go up. So these two verses here are examples where the Hebrew word Olah does not literally or directly mean a burnt offering, even though in most cases it has been translated like that in the Bible. The literal meaning is to ascend. So remember, we saw before that the word offering is added in many cases. So it is translated as an ascending offering or burnt offering because the smoke of the fire was ascending to God as a sweet savor. Exodus 9:18.
And thou shalt burn the whole ram upon the altar. It is a burnt offering unto the Lord. It is a sweet savor, an offering made by fire unto the Lord.
So the very first time the Hebrew word Olah is found in the Bible is in the story of Noah. which implies that Abraham most likely knew the meaning of that word. And here's the definition for it. 59:30, Olah, burnt offering, burnt sacrifice, ascent, go up. Okay, ascent and go up are the two uses that we saw in these verses up here that we read. So the word in Genesis is Allah, or ascension. Genesis 22 being the story of Abraham and Isaac and the sacrifice. So the translators of the King James Bible translated the altar of Olah as the altar of burnt offering, because the burning of sacrifice was done on this altar. But the literal translation of the word Olah does not mean the burnt offering. It means something like the ascension, or to go up. So properly, the term the altar of burnt offerings should have been translated as the altar of ascension. And here's a verse that kind of helps with that, Exodus 20:26.
Nor shall you go up by steps to my altar, that your nakedness not be exposed on it.
Okay, go up by steps to mine altar. We have already seen where the word Olah was translated in Ezekiel 40:26 as to go up to. So Olah, which is a noun, comes from Allah, which is a verb. And in Hebrew, the verbs are kind of they call them the root, the verb roots, I think. And the other forms, nouns and adjectives, would come from the verb. It was very much oriented towards the action of the verb. The altar of burnt offering should have been more properly translated as the altar of ascent. And the term altar of burnt offering is never used in Genesis. Okay, so now let's read Exodus 30:28.
And the altar of burnt offering with all his vessels, and the laver and his foot.
Okay, so altar of burnt offering was not used in Genesis, but here we have it for the first time, altar of burnt offering in Exodus. And it was introduced there in Exodus because the sacrificial altar in the sanctuary had actually a ramp up to it, and they would go up to offer a sacrifice. This is a large altar, okay, and they would go up this little ramp to it to deal with the sacrifices. Obviously, the sacrificial system did not originate with Moses in Mount Sinai and was given first to Adam. Okay, so sacrifices started way back in Adam's time, and he did not have, a big altar with a ramp going up. It was just a pile of rocks, basically, is how it's normally pictured. All throughout Genesis, where the altar of sacrifice is used, it was never referred to or called an altar of burnt offering. It was just called the altar, or altar of ascension. Nevertheless, burnt offerings were burnt on those altars. The reason it was not called that in the book of Genesis is simply because before the sanctuary was built, the altars had no ramps or steps. Here's a couple of pictures. This is what it might have looked like in Genesis. That's actually, quite a pile of rocks. It may not have been that high, but they were relatively small altars. No steps were needed. And this is, of course, just a concept of the altar of burnt offering in the sanctuary, where there would be a ramp going up to it because it was quite large. Genesis 22:2.
Okay, and he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer Allah him there for a burnt offering, Allah, upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of.
Okay, so the word offer, that's the Allah, is that word Allah in Hebrew. Okay, so God was asking Abraham to literally ascend Isaac, to bring him up.
Mm-hmm.
It says in the King James, offer him there. It's really bring him up there, up the mountain. 1 Kings 10:5.
And when I'll read 4 as well, because it makes more
Okay.
sense. And when the Queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he built, the food on his table, the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters and their apparel, his cupbearers, and his entryway by which he went up to the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her.
Okay, so now we're going to look at a totally different story, that of Jephthah's vow. Interesting story that seems unrelated, but we're going to find there's a very close relationship between this story and the story of Abraham and Isaac. Hey, Axel, you're there, if you could read that, please. Judges 11:29-30.
Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he passed over Gilead and Manasseh, and passed over Mizpah of Gilead. And from Mizpah of Gilead he passed over unto the children of Ammon. And Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord, and said, If thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into thine hands, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering.
Okay, and now let's read Genesis 22:2.
Offer him Allah there for a burnt offering, Olah, upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. Genesis 22:2.
Okay, so the point here was to make a comparison between those two, and I've laid it out here from Judges and from Genesis. Offer it up Allah for a burnt offering. In Genesis, offer him Allah there for a burnt offering. So you can see it's exactly the same structure. So that's interesting. This is making a comparison between the story of Jephthah and Abraham and Isaac in Genesis. So considering Jephthah, what spirit came over him in what we read here?
The Spirit of the Lord.
The Spirit of the Lord came over him. So what might have influenced him to make that vow, considering the Spirit of the Lord came on him in verses 29, and then right after that, he makes this vow? What might have influenced him to make that vow?
Spirit of the
The
Lord.
Spirit of the Lord came on him, and he made this vow. So that's interesting. That kind of implies that it was inspired by God, really.
Yeah.
It at least sounds like it. Okay, now I'm not going to read all this. I'll try and pick out the important parts, but this is a commentary from Adam Clarke, who's a well-known commentator on the Bible. So he's commenting on this passage in Judges 11. Shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. The translation of which, according to the most accurate Hebrew scholars, is this: I will consecrate it to the Lord, or I will offer it for a burnt offering. That is, if it be a thing fit for a burnt offering, it shall be made one. If fit for the service of God, it shall be consecrated to him. So what would a thing fit for a burnt offering?
A lamb.
A lamb, or lamb would be good. It could be an ox.
I don't think nothing, because he never wanted offerings and sacrifices to begin with.
That's true. But he gave them because man needed them, and he designated some animals that were suitable for burnt offering and some that weren't. Those that were would be, a lamb would be very good, an ox, such clean animals as that, but not, say, a dog or a cat that he might have as a pet in his house, for instance, and not a person. You do not offer a person as a burnt offering. That never happened in the sanctuary service.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was a clean animal, like those designated for burnt offerings, then it could be used as a burnt offering. If not, so if it was a person, someone fit for the service of God, it would be consecrated to him, that person would. It mentions human sacrifices were ever an abomination to the Lord. Okay, we know that. In fact, one of the reasons God drove out the Canaanites because they offered their sons and daughters as burnt offerings.
Mm-hmm.
Jephthah would have been well acquainted with the law of God and sacrifices and everything. Okay, you can read through that if you want, but okay, it appears evident, this is continuing Adam Clarke's commentary here. It appears evident that Jephthah's daughter was not sacrificed to God, but consecrated to him in a state of perpetual virginity, for the text says, she knew no man. For this was a statute in Israel, that persons thus dedicated or consecrated to God should live in a state of unchangeable celibacy.
Well, what about Samuel
I don't believe he ever married.
or Eli?
Well, Eli married because he had sons, right?
Right.
The priests were allowed to marry.
Yeah, the priests were allowed to marry.
Weren't they consecrated?
Well, every priest was consecrated in a sense. That may be different, a different type of consecration. I'm not sure. We'd have to look at that. Okay, in Leviticus 27, it just talks about when a person is dedicated, I guess, or vowed to be dedicated, they can actually be redeemed. Okay, so in this case, if Jephthah had changed his mind, basically, he could have redeemed his daughter for 30 shekels of silver.
Hmm.
Okay, could have basically canceled that vow.
Hmm.
And let's read Judges 11:34.
When Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, there was his daughter coming up to meet him with timbrels and dancing, and she was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter.
Okay, so an only child, just like Isaac was. She was not only Jephthah's firstborn, but his only born, and God asked for that child to be killed. Would he do that? No, I don't think so. And it's amazing that this story matches the story of Isaac, who completely surrendered to the will of his father Abraham, because Jephthah's daughter submitted to her father's will as well. She just asked for 2 months to visit her friends before she was consecrated to the full-time ministry as a virgin of God. After she bewailed her virginity upon the mountains, she came home, and then Jephthah did with her according to his vow which he had vowed, and she knew no man. She bewailed her virginity, it says, so she sorrowed over not being able to ever marry and have children, which of course is very highly valued in that culture, to be able to have children and extend the family for the next generation as well. And it's interesting that in Jephthah's case, she was his only child and he actually had no sons. So this would mean if she didn't marry and have offspring, that the family line would die out, which was not considered very good in that culture. So it says she was not bewailing her life, right? She didn't expect to die. She was bewailing her virginity, the fact that she would never be able to marry and have children.
Yeah.
Okay, Judges 11:39.
And it came to pass at the end of 2 months that she returned unto her father, who did with her according to his vow which he had vowed, and she knew no man.
Okay, so Jephthah made a vow. Now we're going to look at the fact that there's two types of vows. And the first type is called a nader, and that is just a simple vow. Okay, it describes it here. Despite its sacredness, this vow, the one who vows it is not under obligation to keep it if it binds him to perform a wrong act. Jephthah's vow was contrary to the express command of the law, and therefore was not binding. Now, this is said in terms of the understanding that she would be offered as a burnt offering, which I don't believe is the case. So this commentary is saying that he was vowing to offer her as a burnt offering, or vowing to offer as a burnt offering the first thing that came out of his house. But because that was his daughter, it would not be binding. The second type is a karem, second type of vow, and it is more like burnt offering or utter destruction. It says that, it doesn't say she died, okay? What happened to her going forward was she lived without ever marrying, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the last clause of that verse, which says, and it was a custom in Israel, actually belongs to the next verse. It's just a problem of verse divisions in that case. Does that make sense in the story of Jephthah and his daughter, that there's a parallel there between what happened in their case
Yeah.
and with Abraham and Isaac? Okay, I see agreement. Good. Okay, so let's go on to the firstborn and the Levites, Exodus 22:29.
Thou shalt not delay to offer the first of thy ripe fruits and of thy liquors, the firstborn of thy sons, thou shalt give unto me. Exodus 22:29.
So God did not command the Israelites to offer their sons as sacrifices to be killed, but to serve him. Okay, and this is that word offer there again. When the father died, the firstborn was to be the priest of the family. Okay, and then Numbers 8:21.
Yeah, why would they be given the inheritance or the greater inheritance if they would be killed?
Yeah, good question. Exactly.
That's right.
Yeah, good.
And the Levites purified themselves and washed their clothes. Then Aaron presented them as though a wave offering before the Lord, and Aaron made atonement for them to cleanse them.
And then Numbers 8:13-15.
And thou shalt set the Levites before Aaron and before his sons, and offer them for an offering unto the Lord. Thus shalt thou separate the Levites from among the children of Israel, and the Levites shall be mine. And after that shall the Levites go in to do the service of the tabernacle of the congregation, and thou shalt cleanse them and offer them for an offering.
They were to be offered for an offering, but of course they weren't, wasn't a burnt offering, obviously. So other verses about the firstborn. So were the Levites killed or consecrated when Aaron offered them to the Lord? No, of course not. They were consecrated to the Lord alive. So when Abraham was asked to offer his son to the Lord, it was to consecrate his son to the ministry, and quite possibly because Isaac would soon relieve his elderly father from his priestly duties in his own home, his own family. This is, of course, towards the end of Abraham's experience after he had had many failures before that, which is kind of interesting. Remember, he lied about his wife a couple of times and did other things that I think would have made him more determined in this case to obey his understanding of what God asked him to do. Okay, we can learn a little bit more from Paul. Let's read Romans 12:1.
I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service.
This just goes along with this category of living sacrifices. Firstborn and Levites were living sacrifices, and Paul is telling each of us actually to present our bodies, ourselves, as a living sacrifice. Okay, there's no burning involved in that. Okay, here's another little example from the story of Hannah, 1 Samuel 1:11.
And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man child, then I will give unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head.
So she was going to give him to the Lord, into the Lord's service. Let's read verse 24.
And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her with 3 bullocks and 1 ephah of flour and a bottle of wine, and brought him unto the house of the Lord in Shiloh, and the child was young.
Okay, so she brought him up. Again, that's another use of that word Allah. Okay, as Isaac was brought up to Mount Moriah. So just as in the story of Jephthah, Hannah made a vow. Then she took him up, which is the same word as to offer or to ascend. Hannah ascended to Samuel as a living sacrifice to the Lord, and Samuel became a prophet. Okay, Hannah ascended with Samuel as a living sacrifice. Okay, so back to Abraham here. Genesis 26:5.
Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws.
Okay, so the word for obeyed there is shema. So shema really means to hear, listen, and it can be obey, but primarily it's to hear. So how did Abraham obey? Was it by being willing to kill in response to the voice he heard? Or was it by not killing in response to the 6th commandment, thou shalt not kill? In a sense, it was to both, I guess. like I mentioned, he had failed a number of times before that. And I think in this case, he was wanting to go through at any cost to obey what he understood God to be telling him to do. So Abraham had failed previous tests by doing things his way. Now he was determined to do things God's way. Abraham was faithful to God, very faithful. This is why he nearly killed his son. But keep in mind that he was faithful to a command that God never gave. Abraham thought he was being obedient to God's words, and God accepted his obedience, and it was counted to him for righteousness. Okay, Romans 4:3.
For what saith the scripture? Abraham believed God, and it is counted unto him for righteousness.
What is righteousness? Isn't righteousness right doings, right actions, right acts? Breaking God's holy law is not righteous. It's not a righteous action, is it? It says let's read it, 1 John 3:4.
Whosoever commits sin transgress also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law.
Okay, that's pretty plain. And then 1 John 5:3.
For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome.
Okay. And then John 14:15.
If ye love me, keep my commandments.
By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, counting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure.
So what Abraham almost did was certainly not a righteous act. Had he done it, we could hardly call him righteous. So why did Paul say that it was counted to Abraham for righteousness? Because it was counted for righteousness. You understand? The act
No.
it's not a righteous act, but it was counted for righteousness because his heart was right to obey.
Mm.
It's his understanding that was the problem. And that understanding is kind of logical when you think back of Abraham a little bit. You know, he came from Ur of the Chaldees, where it was common to offer your children as a burnt offering. I mean, it didn't happen every day, obviously, but it would happen, you know, in extreme circumstances or for extreme needs, I guess. So God counted Abraham's act as righteous, even though it really wasn't. Killing is
But
sin.
you think maybe sometimes God would count when Catholics are doing penance?
God looks on the heart,
Yeah.
right? And he
Mhm.
takes into account our understanding. So a person can have quite a wrong understanding, but if their heart is right, God will honor that and will make it a lot easier for him to lead them into a correct understanding, I
Mhm.
think. So killing is sin, plain and simple. But because Abraham believed that it was God who was asking him to do such an act, and he trusted him who he thought had commanded it, God counted or considered it as if Abraham were obedient to his commands. Abraham was not righteous in what he did, but God considered it as if he were righteous. Okay, here's another thought. Why would God ask that of Abraham? Romans 5:20.
Moreover, the law entered that the offense might abound, but where sin abounded, grace abounded much more.
Okay, so where did the law enter? I think it entered Abraham's mind, and what he thought was, I should not kill. God says, do not kill. So that's part of why he had such a struggle on his way to Mount Moriah. He wanted to be obedient to God, and yet he knew the law that he should not kill. And I've got a whole page here on Romans 5, kind of explaining how this works. The law enters our mind so that we can be aware of our own sinfulness. It says that the knowledge of the offense might abound. The knowledge of our own sins can abound, and we can feel the need to be penitent, to confess our sins and forsake them. So where sin abounds in the mind, it opens the mind to accept grace more readily. Anyway, it's explained better probably on that page. So this is an important verse, I think, to understand correctly. God is not wanting sin to abound, but he wants awareness of sins. He wants us to be aware enough of our own sins that we will be open to accepting his forgiveness. So I think this whole episode, in a sense, was for an effort to get Babylon with its child sacrifices out of Abraham. Okay, he had got Abraham out of Babylon, out of Ur of the Chaldees, but he still needed to get some of those Babylonian practices and thought patterns out of Abraham's mind. Another thing about this, about God asking Abraham to do this, was God blessed Abraham by helping him to see Yeshua's sacrifice in the future. John 8:56. Axel, you have a comment or question?
Yes, with regards to your statement about Abraham, in that while his act was not righteous, his heart was in the right place. That really struck me. I found it rather profound. But it also led me to reflect on a passage, Romans 2, verse 12 to 16. And if you permit me, I would just read through it.
Go ahead.
For as many as have sinned without law shall also perish without law. And as many as have sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. So I take that to mean that those who have no knowledge of the law in itself does pronounce judgment, if you will, against them, and the same for those who do know the law. For not the hearers of the law are just before God, but the doers of the law shall be justified. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by the nature the things contained in the law, these, having not the law, are a law unto themselves. So I'm assuming that is where the heart comes in, because you said that God judges the heart.
Yes.
And it goes on also to say, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the meanwhile accusing or else excusing one another in the day when God shall judge the secrets of men by Jesus Christ according to my gospel. So what if you have someone who's of a different religion other than Christianity, and they're considered a good person? They don't kill, they don't do stuff that is untoward. I would rather, based on your explanation, I would rather suspect that that person would be judged according to a certain standard of righteousness, even if they do not know anything about Jesus Christ. But the law being written in their hearts, that would judge them. And perhaps the right precepts of whatever religion it is that they're practicing. Would I be correct in making such a statement?
Yeah, no, I think that's all very good. I put Romans 2:12 in here, and for as many as have sinned without law, kind of like up here in Romans 5:20, where I inserted the law entered the mind. I think down here, for as many as have sinned without, I'm just trying to think what words could be added in here, because it has to do with the knowledge you
Yeah.
have of the law.
Without knowing the law.
Yeah. Would that fit in here? And I got to think about that some more, but no, that's a good parallel. I think of this other verse too. The times of this ignorance God winked at. In other words, he
Aye.
overlooked times or people who perhaps were ignorant of the letter of the law, but had the principles written in their heart and lived by them. I think
Yeah.
that's what it's referring to.
I mean, if I could say it, even such a person who, even though they've we're not saved by the works of the law, but it is the outpouring of I mean, good works. How should I put this? Works are not discounted. So say, for instance, somebody who is deemed good by our standards, I'm just using that as reference, and they, at some point in their life's history, they're confronted with the knowledge of Jesus Christ, and they've rejected it because they're devoted to their religion. I suppose that rejection in itself would judge them, because in as much as they're doing good works, but they've rejected what is the truth.
Okay, a couple comments about that. The works show the state of the heart, for one thing. The other thing is that a person could be presented, and maybe they're Hindu or whatever, could be presented with Christian, let me call it Christian truth, and reject it because it is given in a wrong format. In other words, the person could say, you better obey God or he'll kill you, to say it very bluntly. If they reject a wrong concept of Christianity, that's a good thing. And there will probably be people from non-Christian religions who are saved who have rejected Christianity based on its wrong representation by many Christians, who will be saved because they live by the laws written in their hearts.
I mean, without drawing out because I want to give Amrita opportunity, but this morning before I came on, I was listening to a street preacher in a discussion with a Muslim, and he said, because you've rejected, you'll burn in hell.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And that was just the end. And I'm saying, but this man will never accept that, even if you're preaching Jesus Christ, but that attitude. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay, good. Martha.
Well, it's like he's threatening him.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's a fear-based gospel that we want to reject because it's not true.
Yeah.
But my comment was, if the law's written in our hearts, is it from birth?
No.
Are we born with the law written in our hearts?
No, we're born in sin and iniquity, unfortunately.
But we have a conscience.
But we have a conscience, and if we will turn to the Word, through our parents' early example and later on by our own study, turn to the Word and learn what God is truly like, then the law can be written in our hearts. Yeah.
Well, that might be another subject, and I tend to do that, but I just put the seed in, so maybe you can think about it next time. But in the Old Testament, it does say that the sin and the guilt does not pass from the Father to the Son.
Right.
So I'm just questioning and challenging the whole thing of original sin, and that we're born sinful and fallen. So
yeah, we're born with a sinful nature, a propensity to sin. We're sin sick, but that doesn't mean we've sinned. Okay.
How can a baby sin?
Yeah, a baby doesn't, even if they cry when they're hungry, that's not a sin.
So when the baby is born good, innocent?
Is the best way to say it, not from a legal perspective, but from the biblical health model, is the baby is born sick. The baby is born with a terminal condition that unless it accepts the remedy and is healed, they will not be saved. Not because of their fault, but that's just the condition we're born in.
So they're innocent.
They're innocent, they're not guilty, but they're still sick.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go on to read, we'll wrap up here in a bit, John 8:56, Axel.
Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad.
This is kind of showing this little picture here, Abraham and Isaac with the wood and everything. I guess that's the fire in this little pot he's holding, going up to offer up his son Isaac. And of course, it was a struggle for Abraham to continue on that journey. He's pointing up here, isn't he? He's thinking about offering up his son. Well, of course, this reflects our Father in heaven, who had to make the decision to offer up his son. So his sacrifice, Abraham's, typified the sacrifice of the Heavenly Father in giving his only begotten Son for fallen humanity. So this experience that Abraham went through also helped to cure him of pagan practices, and we mentioned this before, especially the idea of child sacrifice and appeasing deity. It's interesting, this is quite interesting, that there is no record of Abraham or Isaac offering sacrifices after this incident, except, he offered that ram immediately there. He just had to kill something, I guess. So Isaac is the only patriarch who was nearly offered as an olah, yet he is never described as offering one himself. Kind of interesting.
Well, I think there was some trauma there, even though there was maybe a passing of the test, but it seems that the Bible says after that, as they were coming back to the home where the mom was, Sarah, doesn't it say that he told his dad, keep moving forward, I'll go later? Like he wanted to spend time by himself, Isaac did. And then when he did come back home, he started living in his mom's tent. And I think tradition has it that Sarah died from when she realized what had been taking place, because apparently she didn't know what Abraham was up to.
Yeah, I think that would be from tradition, just like you say, but I understand that Abraham left with Isaac and the two servants before Sarah even woke up. He didn't want to tell her what was about to happen.
Yeah, he rose in the morning, it says.
He rose early in the morning. So just a kind of last thing here, we talked about God, he doesn't tempt, but he tests. So here's a question, can we test God? So let's assume you hear a voice or teaching telling you to break one of the commandments for a good cause. What should you do? Okay, and we have some guidance. Isaiah 8:20.
To the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them.
Okay, to the law and to the testimony. We have to go by the word of God. 1 John 4:1.
Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits, whether they are of God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world.
Okay, so we're to test. Yours said, King James says, try the spirits. The word try here is prove or try, to test, examine, prove. Someone might be thinking, do we dare test God's spirit? Well, if we have a voice, an impression or something coming to us, we have to test it. We have to know that it is God speaking to us, and he will not speak contrary to his word. Here's a good verse, Psalm 34:8.
O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in him.
And to taste is essentially to try, the expression a taste test. Okay.
Or
And then,
despisest thou the riches of his goodness and forbearance and long suffering, not knowing that the goodness of God leads thee to repentance?
okay, so taste and see that the Lord is good. When you've tasted and understand that he is good, that will lead you to turn your heart towards him. Absolutely. And the better God looks in your eyes, in your understanding, and the more you understand his love for you, the more strongly you will turn towards him, I believe.
Amen.
And just a last question here. There's a little thing about Peter that kind of relates to this that I didn't include, but what is a major difference between Abraham and someone like Peter or us? I'll just quickly relate. There's the incident where Peter was in vision, and in vision he saw this sheet full of animals come down. He was very hungry at the time, and he was told, Arise, Peter, kill and eat. And he said, Not so, Lord, I have not eaten anything common or unclean. So he obeyed in that sense, whereas Abraham went ahead in the misunderstanding to kill and offer up his burnt offering his son. So in light of all that, what's a major difference between Abraham and someone like Peter, or I would say, or us?
Peter had been with Jesus.
Oh, that's very good. Okay. I like that. Any other thoughts?
And Abraham had come out of a culture where sacrifices were offered.
So a place
Or-
with a very different picture of God.
Right.
Yeah, I think it really comes down to an understanding of the character of God. And Abraham, he walked with God, but he came out of that Babylonian confusion and had a lot of misunderstandings about God and his character. We have the advantage of looking back on Peter's day, even and beyond that. Peter, of course, walked and talked with Jesus, for 3.5 years about, and we can read about that, and we've learned much more about God's character. So we have an advantage in a sense, as even Peter did over Abraham, with a knowledge of God's character. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Hopefully that made sense, and it helps to kind of explain that no, God did not ask Abraham to kill and burn his son. He would never ask anyone to do anything against his commandments.
But Abraham thought that's what God was asking.
Yes, yes.
Hmm.
But it was never a temptation, but due to his misunderstanding, it became a test. And in a sense, Abraham passed the test because he was faithful to do what he thought God commanded him to do. Okay, so thank you, everyone.
Well, I think
Thank you, Ray. Thank you.
I think I'm getting a sweet glimpse of the character of the Father through the fact that sometimes in my life I thought I heard his voice telling me to do something, and then I thought, oh, maybe it wasn't him. And then I felt guilty, that, oh, maybe I misunderstood you, Father. But perhaps he doesn't blame me for that. So thank you for sharing.
Okay, thank you. Good. Okay, thank you, everyone.